We were talking about Ivan Tors, and he'd come up with this idea for a underwater.
Yeah, well, that I was saying that actually was after his first association, because Ivan always had science on his brain. That was what he did, and it came from a lot of different places. I mean, Gentle Ben, it was really a guy, a veterinarian, and so forth. But Sehan, he got this idea about underwater, and I think it was tied in with the fact that Cousteau had put together the scuba diving tanks and so forth, and we shot this pilot off the coast of Catalina. It wasn't easy because there's some clear water there, but it was not easy to try to accomplish. But there's a little plankton in the water and so forth, and fogged up some things. But the pilot was a little far-fetched, but it was about an Air Force or Navy pilot who crashes, and he's in an air pressure cockpit, and he's underwater in the cockpit, and he can't get out. Now, it's a little ludicrous because Bridges is down there with an axe trying to break this plexiglass. I don't know if that was, but it was brilliant. I mean, it really worked. And Fred, though, he'd already been selling. He had everybody primed in the syndication marketplace, and darn if CBS didn't call up and they said they looked at this and said, well, this is perfect for us for the network. We want to put it on the network. But by that time, it was so far, Fred had his business plan. His business plan said Sea Hunt, goes into syndication, and that's where it went. And the great thing about that, I always use that as an example because I think the melding, I used to say the chemistry of the star with the material. Lloyd, he was like the first piece of beefcake. He had that Jansen swimsuit. He had a good physique. And I think there was a little fantasizing going on. The women watched that. And it was unbelievable. I mean, the way we put it together, and it was like for $22,000 an episode. We'd go to either the Bahamas or we'd go to, I think it's Crystal Lake in Florida. And they'd shoot all kinds of run-bys. Let's say swim-bys, pardon me. Swim-bys. They'd shoot. We had a guy named Courtney Brown, and he was Lloyd's double. And he was a great piece of manpower. And they'd just go down and they'd take a couple other guys and they'd shoot they design all the action for these episodes. And as I said, we'd have a lot of just, like in Westerns, they have the ride-bys or the run-bys or whatever, the car run-bys. We had swim-bys. And that's the way he put it together with a lot of bubbles. And we shot almost all the above-the-water stuff here, and then we'd go down to Florida and shoot. And the show was on, I guess, 3 or 4 years? Probably only 3 years because Bill Hayes represented Lloyd Bridges. He only made a deal for 3 years, and I don't think they ever got him to go any longer than that.
Now, Ivan Tors was known as somebody that would be not reluctant to try out new techniques himself before he asked his actors to do that.
Yeah, he would. I don't know if he ever jumped from a plane for ripcord, but he was a fanatic. Anytime he saw any type of new piece of equipment, he wanted to try to incorporate it in the show. So one day he said to me, "Let's go down to Marineland. I want you to ride with me. I'm going to meet some people." And that's actually where we shot some of the underwater stuff for the pilot.
Marineland?
In Marineland, yeah. They allowed us to put the plane down, and there are pieces of the plane.
In Palos Verdes?
Yeah.
At that time? Because it's no longer in existence.
No. But we go down there, and he pulls up to this dock, which is about, 500 feet from Marineland. And there's a guy there with a piece of equipment. I said, "What is this?" He said, "Well, you wait and see." So Ivan gets in the backseat of the car, takes off his clothes, puts on his swimming trunks, dives in the water. "What are you doing?" He dives in the water. "Okay, bring that over here. I want to show this guy what it is." He had this little machine, I don't know what they even call them, but it had, propellers on it, and it was for pulling you along above or under the water. So next thing you know, Ivan's out there going around in circles, holding on to this thing. These propellers are shooting him around. Of course, it became an important part of the series then, because every time they had to move somewhere, instead of just swimming, they'd get these little motor gadgets and they'd pull themselves around underwater. But he loved science. He was kind of a self-taught, scientist. And he tried to incorporate that, I think, in many things that he did.
Why wasn't Ivan Tors more successful?
Well, he was, in a way. I mean, he had a lot of series on the air. Gentle Ben, Cowboy in Africa. He built big business, but, you know, he couldn't control it. He couldn't control the costs. He couldn't control the operation. And then he got into some crazy scheme to make feature pictures, low-budget feature pictures. And the next thing you know, I mean, he owed the Consolidated Film Industries $900,000, and he was trying to make these pictures for, he thought he could sell the other side. He was getting $500,000 against $1 million or $1.5 million. He thought he could sell them, and it all went away. He came to me later at Metromedia. We tried to do Seahand again. We did it in a series called Primus. Unfortunately, talking about chemistry, we had the wrong guy. We had Robert Brown, who had done a series for us at Screen Gems, and he was just the wrong person. I mean, and I thought, you know, this guy, I remember in the pilot for Here Come the Brides, he does a boxing match. He's strong, and I saw him in the water. It was a disaster. I mean, he couldn't even dive. I mean, it was so terrible. But we had to for our way through, you know, because he made the pilot, and so it didn't work. And then Ivan came to me a couple of years after that, and he was kind of disoriented, and I said, what's wrong with you, Ivan? Because he had another idea. He always had ideas. I was in business for myself by this time. And he said, you know, I was over at Universal, and the elevator door opened, and I stepped in, and I fell into the pit. I said, what do you mean you fell into the pit? Well, Universal didn't have a basement, but somehow or another, the elevator wasn't all the way down. And he stepped in, hit his head, and then fell down in this pit, which is about 10 or 12 feet, and hit his head and hurt himself. And a year he's gone. Just died. It had something to do with this accident. It was all over.
Let me ask you about Highway Patrol. Earlier you'd mentioned that in the early days of television, you'd get actors who, motion picture actors whose career had peaked. Was that the case with Broderick Crawford, who starred in Highway Patrol? Had he not won his Academy Award yet, or was this after his Academy Award?
It was after. Yeah, after. Well, you know, we had Richard Carlson. It was the same kind of situation. Richard had been a big character actor. Lloyd, too. Lloyd had done, I think, High Noon before he got into the, before he ever did See Hunt. And Brod was really, he was pretty much gone.
He had a drinking problem, didn't he?
Yeah, a drinking problem.
Putting it mildly.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to hire a guy to drive him all the time. I gave this guy, I never forget, his name was Arthur Aldridge. I gave him $75 a week. He came to me one day and said, Mr. Freeze, I can't make it. This guy's working me 24 hours a day. He said, I got to take him to the studio. After I got to take him to dinner. Then I got to take him to someplace. He drinks till 3 o'clock in the morning, and he says, go over to this place here, park, because they open at 6 o'clock in the morning. I sleep in the car. He gets up at 6 and he starts drinking. I mean, I've seen it. I would see him take a glass of vodka just like that, straight. It was unfortunate because he was a great man. He really was. But he was pickled half the time. I mean, you know, I used to like hold him up. 10-4, 10-4, 10-4. You have that sweating and a felt hat, you know, and a suit and these old Nash automobiles we had on time. But the series was a super hit, you know, unbelievable hit. I mean, it went
largely because of him.
Please?
Largely because of him. He was a bigger than life
because
character.
he, you know, oddly enough, you know, he was a great character, you know, and he I can see, he'd be walking across there talking, you know, with you guys to get more. And he had this kind of tough cop way about him, you know, and I must have made that, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years of that show. You know where our back lot was? You know where the Dodger Stadium is? That used to be called Chavez Ravine.
Yes.
We used to shoot most of our stuff on Highway Patrol because we had to be out in the country, right? We would shoot most of it in Chavez Ravine. We'd be down there for days at a time. Dusty, dirty. God, it was terrible. But we made those in 2.5 days. 22,000, I think the budget was. All shot in color.
And what would be a station lineup for, say, a Highway Patrol? How many stations would you have?
Oh, usually never less than 100. At least 100.
At least 100.
Almost every series was 100 stations or more, yeah. And Fred Ziv was a nutcake on this score. I mean, he would not send a used print to anyone except in the reruns. But every original episode, the buyer got a new print. So we were, I mean, they loved us at the laboratories. We used to spend days trying to negotiate for reels and cans and stuff because they used up thousands of them. I mean, figure it out. We were making 39 episodes. So if you used 100 prints for every, you're making 4,000 prints on 16 millimeter for one series. And he loved that because, you know, Billboard, which you're familiar with, Billboard gave awards for the best marketing and the best, you know, product line. And he loved to get those awards of where the stations would say the Ziv product is the best. When I went to Screen Gems, they'd have 100 markets, they'd make 25 prints. Yeah. They'd change all the release dates and bicycle them all around, you know. By the time the fourth guy got the print, God knows what it looked like, scratches and everything.
We're not talking deficit financing with Ziv. They were making profit, these shows were making profit from the get-go?
Only person that ever knew that was Fred Ziv. That's why he kept the books in Cincinnati. We only had part of the cost. We never got the whole thing. But I'll tell you how secretive he was. He didn't want anyone to know what the pictures cost. I mean, we had bits and pieces of the budget. I probably knew more than anybody in Babe Unger. But he paid all of his actors. The only people who participated were actors. No producers, no writer directors. And he paid them a percentage of the gross so that he wouldn't have to tell them what the pictures cost, and he wouldn't have to ever show his books. He was prepared to show the gross revenue, but he was never prepared to show what the costs were so that someone could ever figure out what the net profit was. And he was never a public company, so no one ever knew what he made. And he probably made a fortune. I think he sold the business to United Artists, which actually was only about 10 years old. In 1959, I think he got $25 million, which today, God knows what that would be, probably 150, 200 million.
Yeah, to your knowledge and experience in this, which of the shows was the most successful, would you say?
I think, you know, the two you mentioned. I think Sea Hunt and Highway Patrol stand out amongst all the shows that he did, probably is the best. I mean, we did things like Eddie Cantor Comedy Hour, Unexpected, My Favorite Story, Meet Corliss Archer. We did all types of shows. I mean, we were doing 250 episodes a year, maybe more sometimes. But I think Sea Hunt and Highway Patrol are a couple of series that kind of pretty much stand out in everyone's mind because they were unique. I mean, we designed those shows, literally. And I have to give Babe a lot of credit for this because, you know, the major studios who were out there with 12, what like they are today. I mean, everything went back to where it was, but they were out there with 10 trucks and huge lights and heavy equipment. And the only way you could shoot these pictures in 2.5 days was to be very portable, very light. We had a little International Travelall, which is like a Suburban, that carried the sound, that carried the camera equipment, and it had a trailer on it to help carry the grip equipment and the lighting equipment. That was it. Any other extra stuff they put in the trunks of the picture cars, you know? So you'd go out with Highway Patrol, you'd have 3 picture cars. They'd put stuff in the trunk, or they needed extra lighting and so. But Babe came up with what he characterized as the documentary approach. And the thing was, hey, we're not going to carry a lot of lights and fill the other side. Our reflectors were this big. Other guys were humping around with reflectors that were 5 by 5. You could hardly lift them. Our reflectors were like this. What do you want here today? This big. Guy walk beside a car, hold the reflector on the sun, boom, that's enough. And everything was like to have a documentary feel to it, and it worked. It worked because we never used makeup. Saved the makeup person. Never paid over scale, $70 a day, except at a star. I mean, everything was done. They said Ziv is cheap, and he was. But he made it work, you know? People came to work. They wanted to work. I mean, Jim Garner worked for us at $70 a day. Steve, his name of company, Steve Whitmore. He worked for $70 a day.
What did Jim Gardner do for you?
Just a role, you know. I mean, nothing. I mean, he used to play baseball. We had a baseball league back at Poinsettia Park.
League, wasn't
it? What?
A softball league, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a softball league. We had like 4 or 5 different teams. That was a good thing about, I must say, Babe had come out of manufacturing. Everybody made a joke out of that. You know, that Babe's a mattress manufacturer. But he also had some of the people skills that take to make a factory work, you know? And so we had baseball leagues. At Christmas, I mean, it was like bonanza time. It'd give golf clubs, luggage, all kinds of things to the actors and even the guys on the cruise. And we'd have a Christmas party. It was huge. And my friend Johnny Epstein, a writer who went on to do Macmillan, and he also did the Flying Nun for us at Screen Gems. He did a lot of different shows. he'd write a show, parody words and things like that. And one time, Herb Gordon, who was our music guy, played the drums. I played the trumpet. Ernest Thumbrill, who was our assistant editor, played the piano. We had with these Christmas parties and these events, we'd have golf. We'd always have a golf tournament. And so everybody was like pulling together, you know. Everybody wanted Ziv to succeed. And it was a wonderful feeling. Great camaraderie. No politics, no bull, if you know what I mean. It was a wonderful organization, and I give Babe a lot of credit for that. I don't give Fred or John a lot of credit for that, but he was the guy who was there on the firing line, and he was trying to make it work. Of course, finally, after about 4 or 5 years of this, the company got so big they cut back on the Christmas presents. So I get a knock on my office door. There's Arthur, bus driver. Got to come in, Mr. Freeze. Yeah, Arthur, what do you want? He takes this box, he dumps it on my desk. It's all these little coconut cheese and sausages and stuff. He said, Mr. Crawford said, you take this Christmas script down and you dump it right on Mr. Freeze's desk. That was cheap. Whatever you were supposed to call me, you know. And I thought, you know, Brod's right. You know, you can't give a guy golf clubs 1 year and give him cheese and crackers the next.
Did Mr. Ziv have any of his family working?
Well, his son-in-law came out very early, right after I came. Well, probably 6 months, 1952. Bobby Youngman, and we had a very good relationship. He, I guess Bob worked there. He was still there when I left. Matter of fact, he was the security guard in the office when they told me to get out immediately on 3 hours' notice. They'd had a really bad experience. A couple of guys that left the company stole all the contract budgets and stuff. So they found out I was leaving. They put Bobby on guard, locked up my files. Of course, I'd already taken everything I needed by that time because I knew I was going for 2 weeks before that.
And just one other question about the Ziv organization. When it was sold, didn't Johnson go over to United Artists?
Oh, the whole organization went. Well, by that time, of course. Well, here's what happened. Because of the fact that they were running such an economical operation, the networks really didn't trust them. And I think the first network series we did was about 1957, 58. It was either Tombstone Territory or Bat Masterson or both. And then we did a show called West Point, and then we did a show called Annapolis. They were done for the networks. But they kind of distanced Babe from those shows because Babe was associated with these low-budget, you know, the highway patrols and that type of thing. And so at one point we were even looking to negotiate space at the Goldwyn Studios, which still exists, you know, to move the network shows over there and disassociate them from the syndicated shows, which really had to be made at a price because the marketing costs and everything were so much more expensive. We're paying salesmen's commissions, shipping, I mean, all types of things. And so they brought in a fellow, well, let's put it this way. A fellow befriended, I think, Johnson in New York, named Dick Dorso. Remember Dick Dorso?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. He ended up running a men's store down here on Camden Drive, and Norman Lear used to buy all of his pork pie hats. He must have bought about 25 of them because I don't know where else they sell them, but he still wears them.
And he has a very famous brother.
Anyway, they brought in Dorso. And Jerry Zeitman was runs the agency now. He was in New York with the Moore's office. And when they went, United Artists bought the company, the library. And from that day forward, it became an unsuccessful operation. They never produced anything that stayed on. I went past 13 or 18 episodes, and United Artists, after 2 or 3 years, they closed it down, and they never touched television, ever. It would never touch it because the guys who had bought that company were so down on the television business that they didn't even want to consider it. So it went from but Fred was smart. See, he sold at the end of 59, and by the time 60, 61 came around, syndication business was going on.
So he got out just at the right time.
Oh, yeah, he just got out at the right time. I don't think he's done anything since.
What led you to leave Ziv and go to Screen?
Well, see, they were telling me, hey, you know, tomorrow these people may be coming by. You're going to have to show them the studio, right? Well, wait a minute, show them the studio. What does that mean? Well, they were giving me a lot of baloney. And coincidentally, I mean, this is the way things happen, right? I'll go to Thanksgiving dinner, and Uncle Joe says, you want to go to California? I swear to God, I'm in my bedroom in this little tract house I have in Sepulveda, and it's John Epstein on the phone. He said, Chuck, you know, I know that you're, you know, well, another thing had happened. I think, I mean, after all these years, I think I'm now from 100, I'm up to like $400 a week, and I've got, by this time, 3-4 kids. And I went in to see Babe, and I said, you know, I think I should have $500 a week, and I want a title now. I don't want to be an executive in charge. I want to be an officer. Make me vice president. Of course, today that job would have been chairman or something, you know. Well, you had to think about it. Oh, my Sturm and Drung and back. I thought to myself, you know, this isn't, what is this? You know, I'm here 8 years now. I'm going to have to, and these guys are talking about selling. They'll sell. Next thing you know, I'll go. I have a family. So John said, they're looking for somebody at Columbia, you know, to be a vice president, executive, vice president. I like that. Vice president, executive production manager, you know. I said, what do I have to do? He said, there's a fellow by the name of Bill Dozier who just went to Screen Gems, and I'll set up an appointment for you. No, take it back. Billy Belasco is an agent who will contact you on behalf of Bill Dozier. I get a call from Belasco. He said, Mr. Dozier would like to meet you. Could you go to his house for breakfast? Sure, where does he live? Right down here, 826 Greenway, I'll never forget. He was married to Ann Rutherford, you know.
The actress.
Yeah. She had been married to one of the May sons, and she owned the house, got it into divorce, so Bill's living there with her. And man, I'm impressed, right? Got 2 waiters serving scrambled eggs and stuff. I mean, it's a great house, and I'm thinking, this is really neat. I mean, I like this. I'm sitting over there at my $22,000 tract house with 3 mortgages on it, you know. And he was very, very classy guy. I mean, always well-dressed. He was just a classy guy. And he said, you know, John told me this, Billy said that, I know what you're doing, we need a guy right away. We got these guys, Rouse and Green. They're making this show with Touch Connors. They don't know what they're doing. We're going crazy. And we'll pay you $40,000. Ready to go to work? I said, let me think about it. Okay, I go, this guy's going to double my salary. You believe this? $40,000. I'm making $18,000, right? So I don't know what to do. But you know what? I'm like, I'm a young guy, see, and I'm thinking, I'm loyal. I've been 8 years. So you won't believe it, but Babe Unger lived 2 doors down here. When you go out my tennis court gate, you can walk in his front yard. So I go out there, and I'd say, Babe, you know, if you just gave me $600, I'd stay, because I love the Ziv company and so forth. Calls me the next day. I don't think we're going to be able to do that. Well, I think I got the message. So I called my uncle. I said, wait a minute, dude, Joe, I mean, you know, I love you too, but, you know, I got to go. He said, go. So I called up Dozier, and he's on a Saturday afternoon and said, I'm your boy. He said, report to work Monday morning. So I said, wait a minute, I can't do that. I got to clean up over here, you know. So I go to work on Monday morning, and the first call, before I even sit down, is Babe Unger, I want to take you to lunch. And in walks Bob Yaman. They lock up all the files. They put big bars in them and everything, you know. He said, just wait here. What's on your desk? And they want to take, I said, don't take what's on my desk. Please don't do that, okay? That's embarrassing. I go to lunch. Babe says, when we go back, it's time for you to go. I said, can I have the car for a week? I mean, I need a car, because we had all these cars on tie-up. You know, I'm driving a Chrysler Imperial, for God's sake. I mean, I was in charge of tie-ups, so I always had a good car. Anyway, that's it. He says, you're gone. So I went home. I didn't have anything. I said, Babe, Bill says, okay, come next Monday. So I reported to work. I think it was a fateful day, December the 7th, 1959. And I said to Bill, I got to have a car right away. Well, television was being run by Jack Fear. Now, Jack Fear was just the way his name sounded. Everyone was afraid of Jack Fear. He ran Columbia production with an iron hand, and he had control of the television production. That's why they wanted me to come in, to wrest the control away from him. So I said, I got to have a car right away. What do you think he signs me? An Edsel convertible. Edsel convertible.
Should have held on to it.
I drove her. I said, Dill, I'm not going to drive this car. I'm not going to drive this car. I said, I don't want to be seeing an Edsel convertible. Besides, it was like mouse green or something. I mean, mustard green. It was terrible. Horrible. I said, I was driving a Chrysler Imperial. That's what I drove to your house. Okay, don't worry, kid. I'll take care of it. So, you know, he gave me a different car, and in about a year or so, you know, I got a Lincoln. But I had my vice president title, double my salary. So I bought a new house, moved up a notch, and it was the beginning of a whole new experience, you know. It's unbelievable. They were making Tightrope. Remember Tightrope? Yes. That was the series, and they were having terrible problems with it.
Put Screen Gems in perspective for us. Screen Gems didn't start as a television production company, did it?
No, Screen Gems started as a commercial company in New York. Ralph Cohen was Harry Cohen's nephew. I think he was Jack's son.
Jack Cohen's son.
Jack Cohen's son, yeah. And but you know, television was building, and he wanted to do more in television. I'm talking early 50s. And eventually he moved. Eventually he wanted to set up an operation on the West Coast.
Harry Cohen did.
No, Ralph Cohen. For the television. And Harry said, I won't have him on the lot. It's a feature picture lot. We're going to have television on this lot. Of course, today, Beechwood has been annexed to the old Goller Street, to the new Goller Street studios. In those days, it ran right through the middle of the studio. He said, there's a couple apartment houses over there we use for offices. Put them across the street on Beechwood. And when I got there in 1959, that's where we were headquartered. They started out with things like the Ford Theater. They made, which is an anthology. They made some Shirley Temple specials with Jaffe, Michael Jaffe's dad. And by the time I got there in 59, they were really cooking. They had Donna Reed Show, which was opposite our Bat Masterson. They had Father Knows Best. They were just beginning Dennis the Menace. They had the Alcoa Goodyear Theater. And they were cooking along pretty good. But what had happened is that there was a family the Columbia was really a family kind of Mishwaka type operation. I mean, the Schneiders were related to the Jaffes and the Briskins, and they all were together. There was a public company, but it was really run like a family business.
Could I ask you to hold for a moment while we change tape? You were mentioning that Columbia was really a family business. I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Well, of course, the Cohens, you know, that was like the beginning of it. And then I think there was some intermarrying there between the Briskins and the Schneiders. And, of course, there was Jaffe family there. And that was pretty much run out of New York. And, I mean, the reason I guess it's always been paramount to me is because as I went through a lot of years there with certain aspirations and hopes and expectations of what might happen, I finally, you know, realized, it takes me a long time sometimes. I finally realized that, you know, it was a family business I wasn't going to be able to crack. And that's really why I eventually left there.
Family business, even though it was publicly owned.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They ran it like a family business, though. I mean, I joined Columbia. I mean, I'll jump ahead for 1 second. We'll come back. But I always remember this. I went to Columbia in 1968. I went back to New York. We had a purchasing agent, Freddie Izzo. I said, Fred, I said, you know, there's beautiful set of luggage down here in Mark Cross, and I would like to really take it home to my wife as a gift for such and such. He said, tell me about it. So I told him what it was. He said, you don't worry about a thing. All the executives at Columbia, they get luggage from the company. I said, what do you mean they get luggage? Oh, yeah, Abe, Leo, nobody buys luggage. Company takes care of the luggage. I said, fine. Went home. 3 days later, here's this whole big package of luggage. I mean, the cosmetic bag, all kinds of things, you know. And I thought to myself, you know, this is a family business. You can't, I mean, generally, you can't get away with this type of thing in a public business. But they were also closely intermingled, you know, that, and that they kind of like just ran it like it was like a grocery store or something, you know. The grocer, he goes around on Saturday, says, well, I need, you know, she says she wants a pound of sugar, a bag of flour. He goes right, takes it all off the shelf, puts it in a bag, takes it home, you know? Who knows? Anyway, Irving Briskin and his son Fred were running Screen Gems before Bill Dozier and Chuck Freeze. And they had made 11 pilots. And I know more, you know the history of television. You know that those 11 pilots, not a single one of them sold. So even though they had some of these other shows on, Donna Reed and that type of thing, management said, hey, this has got to end. So they hired Dozier. Bill had been head of the CBS television network on the West Coast. And, of course, you know his background for years before that. He was an agent, literary agent. He worked in story and the creative side of companies like RKO. And he had an excellent background.
An able man?
I think an able man, but I think by the time he got to Screen Gems, he was he didn't want to work hard. I mean, he would work hard, but he didn't want to work hard, and he didn't fit with these people. He was like a dilettante. I mean, he was always walking around with a handkerchief in his pocket and neatly dressed and that other stuff. And he saw John Mitchell and Bert Schneider and Jerry Himes, who was this little short guy, Brooklyn accent, who actually was his boss. He saw them as kind of cretins, you know. They didn't mix at all. And so almost from day one, it was a bad organization. They said, you're going to be equal. Well, Jerry Himes was in New York. He had the boss's ear, Abe, on the 11th floor. Out on our side, you know, Bill had Sam Briskin's voice, but Sam Briskin was out the door. I mean, he was at a point in his life where he was over. And the Briskins were kind of running out of gas. And the Schneiders and the Jeffys were kind of saying, you know, it's time to move the Briskins on. So little by little, Sam was moved out of the head of Columbia. Irving was taken out of Screen Gems. And Bill was put in charge. We had shows on the air, as I said earlier. Quite a few shows. They were managed well. Irving had brought Harry Ackerman in 1958, who had also been the head of CBS on the West Coast.
Please describe Harry Ackerman for us.
Harry was a gentleman and a very good creative man. He had a lot of excellent with people. Very strong in his opinions, very strong as an executive. And he had gotten, and Irving was using him as his kind of creative force on Donna Reed and some of these shows. Harry being on the network side, having come from the advertising agency, eventually I think early in New York, he had a good feel for the broadcast side. People liked him, you know.
He's a Dartmouth graduate, as I recall.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
So he was a intelligent,
bright
man.
Yes, very bright, a gentleman. That's all I can say. I mean, he was a man who never raised his voice, but he was firm. You just, when Harry made his decision, that was it. Matter of fact, Harry, and when they gave Dozier the pink slip, actually Harry and I ran Screen Gems for about 6 months together. I was pretty much running the production and all the business side. He was over here running the creative side. And we did that for about 6 months and hopefully thought that would be the way it would go, but that's another story. In any event, we get to that. Dozier was having some problems, though. We're making some pilots, and the shows were getting on, and we're staying on. We mentioned earlier in our conversations, Grindle with Imogene Coca. You know, in those days, New York, NBC, I think I'm in New York because they were operating out of New York. NBC was always trying to get an 8 o'clock show. They could never keep an 8 o'clock show, and the Grindle was the next item to go in. It was done by David Swift. In those days, it was interesting, and we talk about this a lot, because the expanse of employment in the networks got out of hand totally. In those days, we had Mort Werner.
At NBC, you're talking.
NBC, Mort Werner and Ed Friendly in New York. On the West Coast, Grant Tinker. I can see the other two guys. They'll come to me. The other two guys, there were three people running
in
West
the
Coast.
Programming department.
The programming, three people. That was it. And they had a full network schedule. Matter of fact, more shows. Because the network started at, like, what? I think 7. When did we move this around? Let's see. Yeah, the network started at 7. You had an hour where they shifted. They finally moved it back to 8 o'clock. No, wait a minute. I'm confused here. But that's okay. We'll get this. The point is that they were programming more time, and they had. I mean, it was unbelievable how few people they really had. And Dozier was fighting a battle. He was not getting pilots on the air that would stay on the air. John Mitchell came up with
well, please put John Mitchell into the picture for us.
Okay. John had joined Screen Gems in 1956. Initially, his job was salesman. That's pretty much what he was for at least 10 years. His job was to market the product in New York. And in those days, because the network operations were essentially centered there, and the top development people didn't operate on the West Coast. They operated on the East Coast. If you made pitches, Harry Ackerman or whoever, when we went back and made pitches, we made the pitches in New York to the development department. These guys out here were pretty much caretakers. They were watching the shows, current programming, and that type of thing. So Dozier was having some problems, and he was only there a couple of years. But he didn't mix well, with these guys. Made such stupid decisions. In retrospect,
Give us an example.
Well, the first joint meeting, we go to the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs, and it's, primarily a very WASP-B hotel. And I don't know if the guys from New York didn't realize what was going on, didn't know the place, or felt that Bill should make the decision, Well, they got there, and of course, they didn't have anything they wanted, And they bagels, no lock, no chopped liver, and nothing. It was like, everything was, you know what I mean? And so they were right away dissatisfied with him. They were really upset about this whole event. And then Bill decides he'd been there before. So he says, I know a fantastic French restaurant we're going to go. So he gets on the phone. Oh, this is Mr. Dozier. I would like to bring a party of 14. I says, absolutely no problem. So we all get about 3 cars. We go in. Place is no longer a restaurant. It's an ice cream parlor. Well, of course, everybody made, hey, Bill, we're at a French restaurant, And at that time, this one guy, Lloyd Burns, was running International. And he was a character in his own right, was drinking Metrocal. So Bert Schneider, who loved to put Dozier, he just loved to twist it. Hey, Lloyd, he says, you got that Italian Metrocal, or what do you have with you tonight, French Metrocal? And it was like went rapidly downhill from there. And, of course, Bill was, I said, this dilettante, and he couldn't stand it, because he wanted to be right, and he wanted to show these guys that he was, he was very suave, and it didn't work.
It backfired.
It all backfired. The whole thing backfired. Everything backfired. And they were beginning to chomp away at him, every way they could chance. So next year, he only makes 3 pilots. Makes Paul Lynde Show, called the Paul Lynde Show. We made a show, which was, incidentally, Bob Finkel was the producer-director. We made Eve Arden, which was put together by Walter Shenson, who made The Mouse That Roared, and Bewitched. And Bill really was, in essence, the motivator of that, because I can see the Screen Gems in her office right now, to Harry Ackerman. We just done a show, I Married a Witch, Bell, Book, and Candle. Let's do a series about a woman and her family who's a witch. And so we hired Saul Sachs, who at that time was the top feature comedy writer. He wrote the script. Bill wanted to put, her name always escapes me. He eventually put her in a series, only lasted 13 episodes. But anyway, Billy Asher came out from New York with Elizabeth Montgomery. Billy had been in New York, had directing the Patty Duke shows, one after the other, with Sidney Sheldon, who also was working on the Patty Duke series. He brought Liz along. That was his girlfriend at the time.
They were not married yet.
No. And he came to see Bill, and Bill said, come on over. So we chatted a little bit. And, well, you know, we'd like to do something. We don't know, Bill, what we want to do. Bill pulls out the Bewitched script. He says, take a reading on this. See what you like this or not. Boom. Chemistry, right? Chemistry. The perfect actress in a perfect series. And, of course, you know, 8 years or 9 years on the network. On those days, you know, you never sold it to the network. It was bought by Quaker Oats and Chevrolet. They actually owned the show.
The advertisers
right.
did.
The advertisers owned the show, and they put it on ABC. And, of course, that kind of went away. That didn't last too long. That lasted for maybe 3-4 years. And then the network said, wait a minute. You know, these guys are controlling our airwaves. People like Lee Rich. He worked for...
Benton and Bowles.
Yeah, Benton and Bowles out of Chicago. Handled big companies, General Mills, those types of people. They would own 2 or 3 hours of a network's time. They'd be able to program that the way they wanted to. Whatever shows, well, I couldn't say they could jam something in, but hey, they were the money, so the network wasn't going to give them too hard a time. But they realized that they weren't controlling their own business.
Didn't the quiz scandal change all of that?
Well, that may have been a part of it. I'm not that close to the quiz scandals. What basically changed it was the network came up with a scheme. They started selling scatter minutes. So no one bought a half hour. No one bought 15 minutes. They'd buy 3 minutes in this show, 4 minutes in that show. And so they little by little, they wrested control of these time periods away from the advertising agencies and turned them to strictly buyers and no longer producers. Because we would deal directly. You know, they had a guy from Quaker Oats and Chevy. They had guys around the office reading scripts all the time. I mean, they were really in control of the shows. Drove you a little crazy, too.
Let me just hold you here and back you up a few paces. Bewitched being such an important series, you mentioned Bell Book and Candle and I Married a Witch. Those were motion pictures that Columbia produced and were successful.
Right.
And you're saying that gave the sort of motivation to do something in television?
Yeah, right, absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. I mean, it's a little bit of a ripoff, but, you know, it wasn't, I mean, the series was so different, it was so generic that there was no way that one could ever imply that someone was stealing rights or something of that nature. But
and just so that I have this straight, the reason that Bill Dozier was sort of the odd man out is that not only was it a family business at Columbia, it was a Jewish family business, and
wasn't.
Bill Dozier didn't fit into that at all.
No, he just didn't. No, and also there was another power play going down. See, when Bill was hired by Sam Briskin, Jerry Himes was hired in New York by Schneider's. When Bill was hired, he said he was told he was going to have equal power, equal control with Jerry Himes. So somewhere along the line, Himes was going to wrest control away from Dozier.
What sort of person was Jerry Himes?
Yeah, he was a tough little pockmarked street fighter. Tough as, I mean, let's put it this way. He had grown up in the business as a syndication salesman. He was a peddler, film peddler. The whole time he was in charge of screen gems, he wanted to do a series called Tulsa. Why? Because he was a film peddler. He sold a film called Tulsa, and he thought that was a great title. So we were always trying to create a series around the title Tulsa. Never did, in any event. But Jerry was a tough little guy, and he was smart. He was enough of a street fighter that he could take anybody's idea in no time it was his. He could take, and he got people working. John Mitchell, he had him, Russ Karp, Bert Schneider. They were all working from Jerry. And they had this team, and they would converge on the West Coast, you know, these 4 guys. And, I mean, it was like they had all the cards because, again, the money was back there, development was back there, sales was there. And we were just like almost back in the Ziv days, the production entity, you know.
Now, you had brought the name of John Mitchell, and you started to explain something about his involvement in all this, and then you let that drop. How did John Mitchell fit into this? He was a salesman.
Well, because the creative development and the sale of the series was primarily a New York business, John like David Gerber, subsequent to that, was a film peddler. In essence, he was always instrumental in being involved in helping to decide which projects were going to be developed. And in those days, we financed a lot of the pilots ourselves. We financed almost all of our own development because we didn't want anybody creatively telling us what to do.
What would be called free balls then?
Well, those were free ball pilots. Yeah, they were attached to no one. And John came up with a fantastic idea. We called it the 3-for-1. We agreed to produce 3 pilots in return for the network guaranteed to put 1 on. We did that 2 years in a row, and out of each year, we got 2 instead of 1 series on the air. So it was a very successful thing.
Which one?
Well, we got The Monkees, and I Dream of Jeannie, or 2 I can remember right at the top of my head. But please don't test my memory totally. But I know there were 4 each. There were 2 years we did it, and we had sold 2 series on each year. Those may have been in different years. I don't know. But John was excellent at this. We would have our meetings, and I never forget the first meeting. Next meeting, he took us to Mountain Shadows in Arizona. And of course, there were a lot of guys like Sun. But Mitchell, that big bald head and all, he was very susceptible to the sun, right?
Describe John Mitchell.
Well, he was a big guy, a lumbering guy, and huge, and kind of a protruding nose, bald head, and he had a kind of an interesting way of talking, a little bit, his mouth a little bit, but he was a great salesman. I mean, here's what this guy did once. We made a pilot on Farmer's Daughter, right? He found out that Ollie Trays and somebody else were going down to Washington to have a meeting.
Ollie Trays. Tell us who Ollie Trays is.
Ollie Trays, I'm sorry. Okay. He was the head of ABC at the time. Unfortunately, I mean, we know his story. The guy ended up, it was unfortunate. But anyway, Ollie was running the network. So John wants to show him the film. And then wants to sell it to him. So he rushes down the train station. He jumps on the same train with Ollie with his projector. He gets on the plane, and he shows him the pilot on the way down on a train to Washington. They bought it. I mean, it was such a crazy thing to do that they bought it. Anyway, John started back in '56, and he was the sales guy. And he had a pretty good hold on things, but he had a lot of moves. I mean, he was very slick. I mean, he knew when to. He would take a pilot, he'd lock it up in a closet. Tell me, sorry, can't show it now. We got to see it. We heard it's so great. Sorry, it's locked up right now. We got things happening here and so forth and so on. And you get one guy trading. He sold Bewitched twice. He sold it to CBS. He sold it to ABC. And guess what? We never did business with CBS for 4 years after that. They were so damn mad at him. Why he did it, I don't know. But we had a good relationship with Tom Moore, who was then in charge of ABC. And John liked him, and ABC was coming on, and they needed screen gems too. So it was a great relationship. Anyway, John was our salesman. We'd go to Mountain Shadows. John would come in. I mean, he had a research guy, boards. I mean, every series that was on the air. Okay, I think this one's going to go. They're going to move that here. And he was strategizing. I mean, it wasn't like flailing around, not, hey, it doesn't make, no. Everything was, from his point of view, that he helped guide the development because he was always evaluating and had a pretty good percentage of what was going to fall off the network and what should be developed to fill those areas. And he was close to all of the network people. And he was a schmoozer. He was always schmoozing with these guys, always on the telephone. Never stopped. He was a great piece of manpower. Wonderful piece of manpower. He only made one mistake. He decided to come to California and be a studio executive. He was doing great where he was. And of course that was his, I mean, he did well out here, but this town can be a real.
Didn't he get caught up in the politics?
Yeah, he got caught up in the Beaglemans, when the Beagleman took over, and I mean
David Beagleman
and Hirschfield and
Abe Hirschfield,
Coca-Cola and Ray Stark, and they ground him up. Man, he was gone. He couldn't.
How did the Screen Gems / Columbia develop into a house of comedy?
Well, it was pretty much, it started to a certain extent with Ackerman because, you know, I think Fathers Knows Best, Donna Reed, Harry went there in 58, and that's pretty much when things started to happen. It got to a point where John would say, see, like Hazel was bought in New York. That's a Saturday Evening Post project. So John bought that from Saturday Evening Post in New York. He said to the network, we're going to do this series. We got Shirley Booth. We're going to put it in front of Harry Ackerman. At those days, he was like Norman Lear or like Carsey Werner. Anything you put his name on, they'd take.
Whose name now? John?
Harry. Like, he was unbelievable. He was. I mean, we had 5, 6 series. He couldn't do all the work. I mean, we had a lot of people helping him, but his name was on just about every comedy.
He didn't write the scripts himself, did he?
No. He was an excellent executive, as I said earlier. He's an excellent executive, and he supervised, and he had producers on all the shows.
And his strength was comedy.
His strength was comedy. He wasn't very funny, but his strength was comedy. I mean, he never did drama. No. But that was only because I'm not sure he couldn't do it. That was only because he became, you know, is Carsey Werner doing drama today? No, they're doing comedy because everybody says, or Norman Lear never did comedy because people thought. As a matter of fact, when I was there, the one thing we were always trying to do was to get into drama because everybody had us typecast. The only thing we had was Route 66, which is and Naked City, which are, historic series in their own right. But those were Burt Leonard. And Burt Leonard, we were just working more as a distributor for. We didn't really have a lot to do with the production of those shows. Burt held those over here himself. Sterling Silliphant, was a top writer. Howard Rodman, who was a top writer. He used, people. I met Sidney Pollack when he was directing, Naked City and Route 66. All those people, were starting in television, in the television series. So we wanted to get a drama on the air. We were always fighting to try to do that.
You also met Sidney Sheldon while you were at Columbia. Explain how Sidney Sheldon was connected with Columbia.
Well, Sidney was one of the most prolific writers, I think, that anyone could ever. He was just, he was writing every Patty Duke show. Again, I think it was a New York motivated situation. He wanted to get to the West Coast. And he wanted to get out. The Patty Duke show was coming to an end. I remember going to his house for dinner. We had long talks about this. And he was really anxious to, pick up and come back. He'd been in California before. He wanted to get back. And he came up with this idea. Kind of corny. I Dream of Jeannie. Spelled with a Jeannie. It went into the 1 for 3 deal. And Barbara Eden, who'd been like a contract player at Columbia as a young woman, was a natural for the show. And then we picked up, I don't know if he was a goofball in those days, Larry Hagman. It was Mary Martin's son, He was really a character. And it happened. And Sidney wrote every episode. And when he was going away for a week, he wrote 2 episodes. He'd sit down Monday morning, or maybe on Sunday, dictate a script. Take a look at it on Monday, fix it up, Tuesday, hand it to the set. They'd read it, fix it, shoot it, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Monday morning, you have another script. He did that for like 2 or 3 years. No one ever wrote a script. He was a producer, he was a writer, story editor, creator, whatever there was. He did it all.
Didn't seem to grind him down.
No. And he that's the way he writes his books. He'll sit down. I remember going to, I was over in Italy, and I was working on a project, doing a recce location trip for The Word, which was a big miniseries I did with David Jansen. And he had himself ensconced in some Italian mansion or castle outside of town. And we went in and he showed me, I'm dictating about, 10, 20 pages a day. And he told me how he did it. He dictates up to 1,000 to 1,500 pages, and then he starts trimming it down. But he just writes and writes.
Dictates to his secretary?
Yeah, always dictated. Never wrote a word. Always dictated. Never typed on a typewriter. Always had it someone he could type, that he could dictate to.
Didn't you go on a memorable trip with him to Japan?
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, Columbia had made Mysterious Island, a couple of pictures out of England. So somebody got the idea that we should do something with that kind of dinosaur, you know, mysterious. I mean, all these crazy birds and albatross and so forth, that we should do that. Some guy, I think his name was not Abe Vigoda, that's the actor, but Joe Vigoda, comes to the New York office and says, they can do this, you can do this type of show in Japan, because they were doing Godzilla and some of these other things. So we had a dinner together, New York guys, and they said, Chuck, you go with Sidney. We got to, you know, see if we can pull this together. So we get a plane, fly over there. They put us in this Japanese hotel, not an American Japanese hotel, the Palace. I'm telling you, unbelievable. We must have had a 3,000 square foot suite. Had a living room. Sidney's on one end, I'm on the other end of the bedroom. You can't even hear when you call down. You got to call by telephone to reach the other person. We have a library. We have a bar. We have a kitchen. It's like a house. And we're ensconced there. At the time, Columbia's shooting Cary Grant in Walk, Don't Run in Japan. And so there's an assistant whose husband speaks fluent. So now we have a Japanese interpreter. These men come up from Kyoto. I mean, we had this big conference room. We said, yeah, we're talking. Meeting's over. I said, well, I think we did pretty good. The guy said, oh, not bad. Next morning, come back. They're right back where they started. I mean, it was the worst negotiation you ever saw in your life. It was so horrendous. You couldn't make any headway. Finally, we go to Kyoto on the speed train. We get down there. We go to the studio. Dirt floors. I mean, it is horrible. I mean, there's nothing there. I don't even
At that point, could I ask you to hold the rest of that story until we change the tape?